Apologize or leave, Miss Sutton. The words fell across the breakfast room at Melbury Court with such clean authority that even the silver coffee urn seemed to catch the silence. Caroline Sutton did not answer at once. She stood beside the long mahogany table with 20 pairs of aristocratic eyes fixed upon her, one hand closed around a black enamel cufflink and the other resting lightly against the seam of her dove-grey morning dress. It was Monday, the 4th of May, 1818, and only 10 minutes earlier she had expected the most difficult thing she would do before noon was remind the Dowager Duchess of Melbury that Lady Henshaw's promised morning call had been moved to Wednesday. Now the Duke of Melbury was asking her to surrender either her dignity or her place beneath his roof. Caroline had spent too many years as a paid companion to mistake the shape of such a choice. Women in her position survived by knowing when not to be heard. She had mastered the lowered voice, the half-step backward, the art of leaving a room before important people became aware she had opinions of her own. Yet inside the pocket of her dress rested a smooth grey pebble crossed by one white vein, no larger than the centre of her palm. Her mother had picked it up on the shore at Margate during the last seaside walk they had taken together and told Caroline that some things became beautiful because they endured being struck by the tide. Caroline had carried it ever since. She did not touch it now. She did not need to. "If your Grace wishes me to leave Melbury Court, I will leave," she said. Her voice was quiet enough that no one could call it insolent. "But I won't apologize for telling the truth." Across the room, Lady Cynthia Kirkham gave a short breath of disbelief. Her brother, Lord Eustace Kirkham, stood near the window with one cuff turned discreetly toward his waistcoat. Too discreetly. Caroline had already noticed the absence at his left wrist. Simon Temple, Duke of Melbury, noticed it now. His expression changed so slightly that anyone who did not know the discipline of powerful men might have missed it. Caroline did not. She had spent 3 years arranging correspondence for his widowed mother, reading newspapers aloud when the Dowager's eyes tired, and moving through this house like a person permitted near power without ever possessing any. She had seen the Duke irritated, amused, weary, and cold. She had never before seen uncertainty strike him in public. "You accuse Lord Eustace of improper conduct toward a servant," Cynthia said. "And now you pretend this is some noble stand for truth. Simon, surely you see what she is doing." Caroline looked at the Duke, not at Cynthia. "I have accused no one of what I didn't witness." "You created a scene in a service passage," Cynthia replied. "My brother was speaking to a maid." Miss Sutton interfered, encouraged the girl's impertinence, and then insulted him when he attempted to correct the misunderstanding. "That is what I was told," Simon said. His gaze remained on Caroline. "And I should have asked what you saw before I spoke." The admission came too soon for comfort and too late to prevent the sting. Still, it altered the room. A few guests lowered their eyes. Others became more attentive. Caroline opened her hand. The cufflink lay against her skin, black enamel edged in gold, a tiny griffin worked at its center. "Lord Eustace barred Molly Finch's passage beside the small breakfast corridor," she said. "He asked her to meet him alone after the household settled for the night. She refused. He caught her wrist when she tried to pass. When she pulled away, this came from his left cuff and fell to the floor." Eustace gave a humorless laugh. "A fastening proves nothing." "No," Caroline said. "It proves only where you were and what came loose while Molly was trying to get away from you." Cynthia turned sharply toward her brother. Simon's eyes went to Eustace's left sleeve. The cuff was neatly buttoned with thread passed through the opening where the fastening should have been, an improvised repair made in haste. Eustace saw him looking and pulled his arm back. "This is absurd," he said. A servant mistook a harmless conversation and Miss Sutton chose to magnify it. "Then let the servant speak," Caroline replied. "Caroline," the Dowager Duchess said softly from the head of the table. It was not a warning. It was the first time that morning anyone had spoken her given name as though reminding the room she possessed one. Simon turned toward the door. "Where is Miss Finch?" Cynthia stiffened. "You cannot seriously mean to question a housemaid before guests." I mean to hear the person whose conduct I nearly judged without hearing, Simon said. That is a mistake I don't intend to repeat within the same quarter hour. The room did not move until he rang. A footman appeared, received the quiet instruction, and vanished. Caroline remained standing. Her pulse had begun to beat painfully in her throat, but she refused to fold her hands over it. Eustace looked at her with a flat contempt that made plain what he believed her rank should have taught her. Cynthia looked less angry than alarmed. That interested Caroline more. Molly entered several minutes later with Mrs. Keene, the housekeeper, at her side. The maid's face had gone pale. Her right hand was clasped around her left wrist. Caroline could see the beginning of red marks beneath the edge of her cuff. Simon stepped away from the table so that Molly would not have to address him from across a field of seated guests. Miss Finch, he said, his voice lower now, you're not in danger of losing your place for what you say here. You're not obliged to speak if you don't wish to. Do you understand me? Molly looked first at Mrs. Keene, then at Caroline. Caroline gave no nod. No encouragement. The choice had to be hers. At last Molly looked at the Duke. Yes, Your Grace. Did Lord Eustace stop you in the passage? Molly swallowed. Yes, Your Grace. Eustace shifted. The girl is frightened because Miss Sutton has filled her head with nonsense. Simon did not look at him. Did he ask you to meet him alone tonight? Molly's fingers tightened around her wrist. Yes. And when you refused? Her breath trembled. He said I'd be sorry if I made him look foolish. I tried to go past him. He caught my wrist. Cynthia rose. This is intolerable. Simon turned then, and the restrained anger in his face stopped her. What is intolerable, Lady Cynthia, is that I issued a command before I asked a question. He faced Caroline. Every person in the room watched him. Miss Sutton, I withdraw what I said. You owe no apology for refusing to deny what you witnessed. Caroline felt no triumph. Only the strange ache of having been pushed toward a precipice and then told the ground had been restored beneath her feet. Simon continued, I owe you an apology for placing you there. She met his gaze. Thank you, Your Grace. He understood, she thought, that gratitude was not forgiveness. Something in his expression suggested he did. He turned to Eustace. You will leave Melbury Court before noon. Cynthia stared at him. Simon, you can't dismiss my brother over the word of a servant and a companion. I am not holding a trial, he said. I am deciding who remains a guest in my house. That decision is mine. And when London hears that Miss Sutton has built a scandal around a frightened maid? Cynthia asked. Do you imagine society will applaud her virtue? Caroline finally looked at her. I don't require applause. Cynthia's mouth tightened. No. Perhaps you require attention. The cruelty was polished enough to pass for wit. Caroline had heard that kind of sentence all her life. She had never before felt less compelled to answer it. Simon spoke instead. No one in this household will punish Molly Finch for speaking. No one will interfere with her wages or reference. Mrs. Keene, see that this is understood. Yes, Your Grace. Molly's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Caroline was grateful for that. Tears would have given the room something softer to remember than courage. Cynthia left with her brother before the hour struck 12. Their carriage wheels had scarcely disappeared down the drive when the breakfast guests began discovering urgent reasons to write letters, walk in the gardens, or return to their rooms. Caroline remained with the Dowager Duchess while Mrs. Keene escorted Molly upstairs to rest. Simon stood by the cold fireplace, looking at the space where Caroline had been when he told her to apologize or leave. No one spoke of what had almost happened. Not yet. Mrs. Keene returned a few minutes later and closed the door behind her. Her face had the composed severity of a woman who had spent 30 years observing households from the side society rarely bothered to examine. Your Grace, she said to the Dowager, then looked at Simon. There's something you should know. Simon's attention sharpened. About Molly. About Lord Eustace. Mrs. Keene glanced at Caroline, as though deciding whether she had earned the right to remain in the room. Caroline wished she would not phrase it that way, even silently. Rights should not have to be earned by humiliation. Molly is not the first girl to lose her place after displeasing Lord Eustace, Mrs. Keene said. The room seemed to grow smaller. Simon became very still. Caroline looked down at the black cufflink still resting in her palm. 10 minutes earlier it had been only a broken fastening on a stone floor. Now it was something else entirely. Not proof of every whispered fear. Not permission to assume what no one had yet said. Only the first visible piece of a question Caroline could no longer pretend belonged to someone else. How many women had been required to apologize before she refused? By the following morning, the black enamel cufflink had become more dangerous than it had been when Caroline first picked it from the stone floor. Not because it had changed. It had not. The tiny griffin still glimmered beneath the black enamel, the torn fastening still clung to its back, and the piece itself remained exactly where Caroline had placed it after leaving the breakfast room, wrapped in clean paper inside the small writing case that travelled with her belongings. What had changed was the silence around it. Tuesday, the 5th of May, 1818, began with rain tapping lightly against the morning room windows of Melbury Court and the house moving with the restrained unease that followed any scandal too serious to discuss openly. Lord Eustace Kirkham and Lady Cynthia Kirkham had gone. Their absence should have restored order. Instead, every servant who entered a room seemed to do so with greater care, and every guest appeared newly aware that doors had hinges, passages had corners, and people of lower rank might possess memories of their own. Caroline sat beside the Dowager Duchess of Melbury with a volume of correspondence unopened on her lap. She had slept badly, but she had not regretted what she had said. Regret would have been easier. It would have permitted her to imagine that silence had been the wiser choice. The Dowager watched her over the rim of her teacup. "You've read the same address 3 times without opening the letter." Caroline looked down. "I'm afraid I have." "Then we shall call that proof you are human and not merely an unusually efficient piece of furniture." Caroline almost smiled. The Dowager's humor had always been driest when she was most concerned. Before Caroline could answer, the door opened and Simon entered. He had dressed for the day with his usual precision, but something in his manner lacked its habitual ease. He paused just inside the room. "Mother." His gaze moved to Caroline. "Miss Sutton. May I speak with you both?" "You are already doing so," the Dowager said. Simon accepted the rebuke without protest. "Then I'll try to improve the quality of it." He remained standing until his mother indicated the chair opposite Caroline. The fact that the Dowager stayed in the room mattered. Caroline noticed that Simon knew it mattered too. He did not ask for privacy. He did not use apology as an excuse to create intimacy where none yet existed. He sat with his hands resting loosely on his knees and looked directly at Caroline. "What I said yesterday was wrong." Caroline did not move. Simon continued. "I demanded that you surrender your character before I had asked the simplest question. I heard Lady Cynthia's account, assumed disorder was the greater danger, and used my authority to end the matter before understanding it. The precision of the admission unsettled her more than a grander speech would have done. There was nowhere for him to hide inside it. You corrected yourself," Caroline said. "After I had already placed you in that position." "Yes." Silence settled between them. The Dowager did not rescue either one from it. Simon's eyes did not leave Caroline's face. "I am sorry." Caroline folded her hands over the unopened letters. "An apology matters, Your Grace." His expression shifted, almost with relief. She continued before he could mistake her meaning. "But only if the next decision is different." The relief vanished. In its place came something steadier. "That is fair." Caroline believed he meant it. She did not yet know whether he could live by it. Simon glanced toward the side table where her writing case rested. "Do you still have the cufflink?" "Yes." May I examine it? The question itself was small. Yesterday, he might simply have held out his hand. Caroline rose, crossed to the writing case, unlocked it, and removed the folded paper packet. She returned to her chair before opening it. The cufflink lay in her palm. Simon did not reach for it until she extended her hand. His fingers closed carefully around the edges, avoiding the torn fastening. He turned it toward the light. "Kirkham Griffin," he said. "Eustace wears these with evening dress and sometimes at breakfast when he wishes to appear more fashionable than the hour requires." The Dowager gave a faint sound of disapproval. His vanity may finally have accomplished something useful. Simon examined the back. The attachment tore rather than unclasped. He looked at Caroline. "That proves it came away by force of movement. It does not prove every detail of what happened." "No," Caroline said. "Molly's account proves what Molly says happened. The cufflink corroborates where Lord Eustace was and that something happened to tear it loose." Simon held her gaze for a moment, then returned the cufflink to her open hand. "You are very careful with distinctions. A woman in my position cannot afford careless certainty." The words came out more sharply than she intended. Simon did not bristle. Perhaps men in mine have been allowed too much of it. Caroline wrapped the cufflink again and returned it to the writing case. She locked the case and kept the key with her. The movement was ordinary, but Simon watched it with an attentiveness that made clear he understood the object remained hers to hold, not his to confiscate for safekeeping. A knock sounded. Mrs. Keene entered carrying a narrow household ledger and 3 loose sheets. She stopped when she saw Simon, then looked to the Dowager. "Your Grace, you asked me to come if I remembered anything more." "Yes," the Dowager said. "Sit if you wish." Mrs. Keene did not. Housekeepers of her generation treated sitting before employers as a liberty best approached cautiously. "I spoke too quickly yesterday when I said Molly was not the first," she began. "I should have said she is not the first young woman whose place became uncertain after displeasing Lord Eustace or Lady Cynthia." Simon leaned forward. "How many?" Mrs. Keene hesitated. "I can speak only for what passed through this household." "Then speak to that." Caroline heard the command in his tone before he did. Mrs. Keene's shoulders tightened. Simon stopped. He drew one breath. "Forgive me. Tell us what you are comfortable telling us." Mrs. Keene looked briefly at Caroline, then back to him. During the Kirkham's visit last autumn, a housemaid named Rachel Fenner was dismissed after Lady Cynthia complained of impertinence. 6 months before that, another maid left without a reference she had expected. There was also a kitchen maid who resigned after a dispute during an earlier visit. I did not connect the 3 at the time. "What disputes?" Simon asked. "That is where I cannot be certain. Lady Cynthia's complaints were always about conduct. Insolence. Familiarity. Improper assumptions." Mrs. Keene's mouth tightened. Words broad enough to mean whatever a lady required them to mean. Caroline felt something cold settle beneath her ribs. "And Lord Eustace? His name was not entered in the records." "But you mentioned him yesterday." Mrs. Keene looked uncomfortable. "Servants notice who is present when trouble begins, Miss Sutton. That is not the same as proof." Caroline nodded. "No. It is not." Simon rose and crossed toward the window. Rain silvered the lawn beyond the glass. "I want the names of every woman involved." Caroline looked at him. "Why?" He turned. "Because if there is a pattern, I intend to discover it. They no longer serve you. That does not mean I cannot help them. It also does not mean you are entitled to question them." The room went very quiet. Simon's jaw hardened before he caught himself. Caroline saw the instinct arrive. A duke had resources. A duke could send for people. A duke could make doors open that remained closed to others. He had been taught all his life to mistake that capacity for permission. If Rachel Fenner left under unfair circumstances, he said carefully, surely she deserves the chance to say so. If she wants the chance. Caroline kept her voice level. But yesterday Molly was able to speak because you told her she could refuse. Those women are not here. They do not depend upon your wages now. Their stories are not household property merely because part of them happened beneath your roof. The Dowager lowered her teacup. She is right, Simon. He looked from his mother to Caroline. Frustration moved across his face, but it was not anger at being challenged. It was the frustration of a man discovering that doing better required fewer immediate actions than doing badly. Then what do you suggest? Caroline considered before answering. We begin with what the household legitimately knows. Dates. Dismissals. References withheld. Nothing more. If Mrs. Keene knows how to reach any of the women, we may send word that they are free to respond or not respond. No summons. No promise of money. No implied obligation. Simon was silent long enough that Caroline wondered whether she had gone too far. Then he said, agreed. Mrs. Keene opened the narrow ledger. Rachel Fenner's entry is the clearest. She placed one finger beside a line written in a neat, disciplined hand. Caroline leaned closer. The date was 6 months earlier. The dismissal note contained only 5 words. Impertinence toward Lady Cynthia Kirkham. Nothing about Lord Eustace. Nothing about fear. Nothing about what had been said in a passage or behind a door. Only a phrase polished enough to ruin a servant without forcing anyone to explain why. Simon read it once. His face became still. Caroline looked at the blank space beneath the entry and thought of how easily silence could be made to resemble order. Yesterday, one maid had spoken because Caroline happened to hear her protest. Rachel Fenner had not been so fortunate. And somewhere beyond the walls of Melbury Court, a woman dismissed 6 months ago might still believe that speaking the truth could cost her the next roof over her head. By Wednesday morning, Caroline understood that a pattern could be more dangerous than an accusation because a pattern tempted people to become certain too quickly. The narrow household ledger lay open on Mrs. Keene's desk, its pages neat with years of wages, departures, references, illnesses, and dismissals, while Caroline sat opposite her with both hands folded in her lap. The black-enamel cufflink remained wrapped in clean paper inside Caroline's locked writing case upstairs. She had not brought it down. It had already done all it could for the moment. It connected Lord Eustace to one corridor on one morning. It could not speak for women who were no longer present. Only what the household properly recorded, Caroline said. Nothing from trunks, private drawers, letters, or servants' belongings. Mrs. Keene gave her a measuring look. You fear we may become too eager. I fear everyone becomes too eager when they believe themselves righteous. The housekeeper's mouth tightened, not in offense but recognition. That is a useful fear. The Dowager Duchess had given permission for the records to be reviewed, but Caroline still felt the weight of each page. A servant's dismissal might require only a few words in ink. Those words could follow her for years. Mrs. Keene turned back to the entries. Rachel Fenner's name appeared first because it was freshest in memory. 6 months earlier. Dismissed after Lady Cynthia complained of impertinence. Before Rachel came another young woman named Anne Mercer, who had left with a reference so coolly worded that Mrs. Keene now admitted it would have damaged her prospects. Before and there had been a kitchen maid, Eliza Broom, who resigned after what the ledger called repeated disrespect during a Kirkham visit. 3 women. 3 departures. 3 complaints connected to Cynthia. Were you present for any of the incidents? Caroline asked. No. Did any of the women tell you Lord Eustace had approached them? Mrs. Keene hesitated. Not directly. Then we cannot say that. No. Caroline traced the edge of the desk with one finger. It would have been easy to make the facts larger than they were. It would also have been satisfying. That was precisely why she refused. Do you know where any of them are now? Rachel is in London, I believe. A cousin of mine heard she was living with an aunt near Bloomsbury and taking sewing when she could get it. And went into service in Surrey. Eliza married a carpenter's son in Kent. Could your cousin send a message to Rachel without making it sound like a summons from Melbury? Mrs. Keene considered. Yes. Then no ducal seal. No promise of wages. No suggestion that His Grace expects an answer. What should it say? Caroline looked at Rachel's dismissal entry again. 5 words had been enough to narrow the young woman's life. Caroline wanted every word of the new message to widen it instead. Say that someone at Melbury Court is reviewing the circumstances under which certain women left service after Kirkham visits. Say Rachel owes us nothing. If she wishes to reply, she may. If she does not, no one will contact her again. Mrs. Keene nodded slowly. And if she asks what she might gain? Tell her the truth. Nothing has been offered. That may not persuade her. It is not meant to persuade her. Mrs. Keene's eye softened a fraction. Very well. By noon the message had gone through the quiet channels by which servants knew more of England than their employers often imagined. Caroline returned to the Dowager Duchess's morning room, where Simon stood beside the mantel reading a letter with an expression that suggested he disliked every line. He glanced up when she entered. Mrs. Keene told me you found 3 dismissals. Caroline closed the door behind her but left it ajar enough that the Dowager, seated at her escritoire in the adjoining room, remained within easy call. 3 departures following complaints from Lady Cynthia. That is all we can say with certainty. 3 is not coincidence. Perhaps not. Caroline. It was the first time he had used her given name without his mother speaking it first. The intimacy of it was slight, almost accidental, yet she noticed. So did he. His expression altered, but he did not correct himself. Miss Sutton, he said more carefully, if there is a pattern, delaying may give them time to frighten others. And moving too quickly may frighten those same women with us. Simon looked toward the rain-dark windows. You sent to Rachel Fenner. Mrs. Keene sent a neutral message. Did you use my name? No, his jaw tightened. Why not? Caroline met his eyes. Because a duke's name is not neutral. For a moment she thought he would argue. Instead he gave a quiet, humorless breath. I keep discovering how many things I considered neutral only because they favored me. That is at least a useful discovery. He looked almost amused, but the expression disappeared when he lifted the letter in his hand. This arrived from London. Bad news? Predictable news. He crossed the room and handed it to her. It was from one of the Dowager's long-time acquaintances in Mayfair, written with the anxious courtesy of a woman who wanted to warn without appearing eager for scandal. Caroline read the relevant lines twice. Lady Cynthia had already reached London. Her version had reached drawing rooms before breakfast trays were cleared. Miss Sutton, according to the rumour, was a paid companion who had mistaken interference for virtue and encouraged servants to interpret harmless attention as insult. A dependent woman, the letter implied, might find moral importance where society had denied her social importance. Caroline handed the letter back. Efficient. Cruel, Simon said. Those things are not mutually exclusive. I could answer this. How? By writing to everyone likely to hear it. And saying what? That the Duke of Melbury assures society his mother's companion is honourable. Yes. Then tomorrow the story becomes that I require ducal endorsement to possess a character. He went still. Caroline had not raised her voice. She had learned long ago that quiet truths were often harder to dismiss. You are asking me to do nothing again, he said. I am asking you not to answer a question that belongs to me. And if the gossip costs you future employment, then we will know what sort of people prefer rumour to fact. That is a high price for principle. It is my price. Something moved through his face then. Not agreement exactly. Respect, perhaps, or discomfort shaped by respect. Very well, he said. I will not write. He paused. Unless you ask. Caroline inclined her head. Thank you. That afternoon, while the rain lifted into a pale wash of sun, a small folded note arrived for Mrs. Keene by hand. The housekeeper brought it directly to Caroline and waited while she read. The writing was careful but uneven, as though the hand behind it had hesitated before nearly every sentence. Miss Sutton, I received your message. Lord Eustace frightened me during the Kirkham's last visit. Lady Cynthia afterward required me to apologize for insulting him. When I refused to say I had imagined it, my reference changed. I beg you not to use my name. I cannot endure that again. Rachel Fenner. Caroline read it once more, then folded it along its existing creases. Does she name what Lord Eustace did? Mrs. Keene asked softly. Neither does she need to. Not for us to understand that she was afraid. But fear is not permission to invent the rest. Caroline carried the note upstairs herself. She unlocked her writing case. The cufflink lay exactly where she had left it, wrapped in its paper packet. Beside it she placed Rachel's note, separate and folded. One object belonged to Caroline's custody. One confidence belonged morally to Rachel. She locked the case again. Simon was waiting in the morning room when she returned, but he did not ask at once. That restraint told her Mrs. Keene had already informed him a reply had come. Did she answer? He said. Yes. And? Caroline held his gaze. Someone has confirmed enough for me to know Molly was not alone. She has not given me leave to say more. Simon's first reaction was visible. His shoulders tightened. His attention sharpened. Questions rose behind his eyes. Did she name Eustace? He stopped before Caroline answered. Silence stretched. Then he looked away and exhaled. No. That is precisely the question I said I would not force. Caroline felt something inside her ease, though she had not known it was braced. She asked for privacy. Then she has it. Even if what she told me might help. He looked back at her. Especially then. The Dowager Duchess entered before Caroline could reply, carrying 2 opened letters and the decisive air of a woman who had already arranged tomorrow before anyone else had considered breakfast. We return to London in the morning, she said. Simon frowned. Mother. Cynthia is already there, and if I remain in Kent while she poisons every drawing room from Grosvenor Square to Portman Square, people will assume I am hiding something. Her gaze settled on Caroline. More importantly, you will not be hidden here for anyone's convenience. Caroline felt the old instinct rise. Stay at Melbury. Let society exhaust itself. Become quiet enough to survive. Then she thought of Rachel's note locked beside the cufflink, of 3 names written into a household ledger, and of a woman in London already being made afraid again. I will be ready, she said. Outside, servants began the familiar preparations for departure. Trunks would be strapped, carriage lamps checked, letters sent ahead. By the next evening Caroline would be in Mayfair, where Lady Cynthia had already chosen the story society was meant to believe. This time, Caroline intended to arrive before silence became evidence. By 8:30 on Thursday morning, Melbury Court had already begun to look like a house determined to forget that anything troubling had happened beneath its roof. Trunks were strapped to the rear of the travelling carriage. Hampers were secured. A groom checked the traces twice. The Dowager Duchess's maid counted shawls and medicine bottles with the grave concentration of a military quartermaster. Caroline stood in the entrance hall wearing her dark blue travelling pelisse and watched servants move around her with the efficient discretion of people trained not to ask why an entire household had changed its plans overnight. Her own luggage was modest. 1 trunk, 1 bandbox, and the small locked writing case she carried herself. Inside that case, wrapped separately, lay the black-enamel cufflink and Rachel Fenner's first note. Caroline had checked both before coming downstairs. The cufflink remained in its paper packet. Rachel's letter remained folded along the creases made by Rachel's own hand. Neither object had moved except because Caroline had moved it. She found comfort in that precision. Facts were easier to trust when they stayed where they belonged. "You intend to keep that case on your lap for 35 miles, the Dowager Duchess asked from the carriage step. "Yes, Your Grace." "Then I hope it contains diamonds." "Only papers." "Far more dangerous." The Dowager climbed inside. Caroline followed with the Duchess's maid, and the carriage rolled away from Melbury Court under a pale sky that threatened rain without quite delivering it. Simon travelled separately. That, too, was proper. Caroline was his mother's paid companion, not a woman whose circumstances permitted 5 or 6 hours alone in a carriage with an unmarried duke, however innocent the subject of conversation. The road westward into London was uneven in places but passable. They changed horses once and paused long enough for the animals to be watered. Hedgerows gave way to busier roads, then to the growing press of carts, coaches, riders, and pedestrians that announced the capital before any familiar square appeared. Caroline did not sleep. The Dowager read for part of the journey and pretended not to notice when Caroline checked the clasp of her writing case after every stop. Nearing London, Caroline slipped one hand into her pocket and closed her fingers around the smooth grey pebble she carried there. The white vein running through it could not be seen, but she knew exactly where her thumb would find it. Her mother had picked it up at Margate and held it toward the light as though it were a treasure. Caroline remembered salt wind, damp hems, and a voice she could no longer hear except in memory. She released the pebble before the carriage turned into Mayfair. She did not need to borrow courage from the dead. She only needed to remember that she had once belonged somewhere without earning permission first. Melbury House received them in the early afternoon. The townhouse was elegant without ostentation, its stone front orderly enough to please Simon and its drawing-rooms warm enough to prove his mother had ruled their decoration. What Caroline noticed first, however, was not the house. It was the stack of calling cards already arranged on a silver salver in the front hall. The Dowager noticed them too. That was quick. The butler's expression revealed nothing. "Several ladies called this morning, Your Grace. 2 left messages asking whether you would be receiving tomorrow." Caroline looked at the cards. She recognized names from drawing-rooms where rumour travelled beneath compliments and scandal was consumed with tea. Lady Cynthia had not merely arrived first. She had worked efficiently. By 4 o'clock, Caroline knew how efficiently. One caller came under the pretense of concern for the Dowager's health and spent 15 minutes avoiding Caroline's eyes while asking whether Melbury Court had suffered some unfortunate disturbance among the servants. Another mentioned Lord Eustace's departure from Kent as though it were an act of chivalrous restraint. A third woman, bolder than the others, said with a sigh that companions were often too emotionally involved in household matters and therefore prone to misunderstand the harmless liberties of guests. Caroline sat beside the Dowager and poured tea without spilling a drop. She answered only what was asked of her. When one visitor looked directly at her and said, "My dear Miss Sutton, I hope you're not distressed by all this unfortunate talk," Caroline replied, "Not distressed, Lady Morley. Only interested by how confidently people repeat conversations they did not hear." The woman coloured and changed the subject. After the callers left, the Dowager gave Caroline a dry look. "You are becoming dangerous company. I was told yesterday I mistook interference for virtue." "Yes. It appears virtue should have learned to remain seated." Caroline smiled despite herself. The smile faded when Simon entered the drawing-room a few minutes later. He had arrived before them but had spent the afternoon receiving correspondence in his study. Now he carried none of his usual papers. He looked from the abandoned teacups to Caroline. "How bad?" "London has decided I encourage servants to invent insults because Lord Eustace refused to tolerate my interference." Simon's mouth hardened. "I can stop that." Caroline heard the same impulse she had heard before. "Not cruelty. Action. Immediate, powerful, efficient action." "How?" she asked. "I can write to the people repeating it. I can make it clear that I believe your account and Molly's. Then tomorrow the story becomes that the Duke of Melbury has lent his authority to his mother's companion. Would that be worse? For the truth, perhaps." He stared at her. You would rather let them talk. I would rather not teach society that my character becomes credible only after you certify it. Simon walked to the window and stood with one hand against the frame. For several moments he said nothing. The dowager rose from her chair, collected her embroidery, and announced that she intended to rest before dinner. Whether from fatigue or design, Caroline could not tell. She left the drawing-room door open behind her. Simon remained by the window. You said yesterday that my name was not neutral, he said. I dislike hearing it. I assumed you might. That did not make it less true. Caroline looked at him. His face had lost the controlled hardness he wore in company. What remained was weariness. There is a reason I react badly to accusation, he said. Not a good reason. A reason. Caroline waited. He turned from the window. My elder sister was 22 when a man she refused began telling people she had pursued him. It was absurd. Everyone who knew her understood that. It did not matter. His voice remained even, but Caroline heard the effort beneath it. He said she had written to him. There were no letters. He said she had arranged meetings. There were no meetings. By the time the truth became obvious, the story had already become entertainment. She stopped attending balls. Then dinners. Then London entirely. Caroline said nothing. Simon continued. I watched my mother defend her. I watched friends insist they believed her while repeating the accusation in the same breath. I decided the accusation itself had been the danger. That if someone had silenced it quickly enough, she might have been spared. And yesterday, Caroline said softly, you tried to silence the accusation before learning who was being harmed. He closed his eyes briefly. Yes. It was not a comfortable confession. That made Caroline trust it more. Sometimes the danger is what courtesy asks everyone not to name, she said. I am beginning to understand that. His gaze dropped to her hand. Caroline had unconsciously slipped her fingers into her pocket again. What do you keep touching? The question was so unexpected that she almost withdrew her hand. Instead she took out the grey pebble. It looked unimpressive against her palm. Smooth. Ordinary. Crossed by one pale line. Simon did not reach for it. My mother found it at Margate, Caroline said. During our last visit there together. His expression softened. Why that one? She said the white line looked as if the stone had been broken and healed without separating. Caroline gave a faint smile. She had a talent for giving ordinary things more meaning than they deserved. Or perhaps for noticing what other people missed. Caroline looked at the pebble, then returned it to her pocket. Simon did not ask to hold it. She was more moved by that than she wished to be. A footman appeared at the open door carrying a small folded message. For Miss Sutton, Your Grace. It came by hand. Caroline's pulse tightened. She recognized the uneven writing before she broke the seal. The note contained only one line. I was mistaken. Do not write again. Caroline read it twice. The words were tidy. The fear beneath them was not. Simon watched her face. Rachel, he asked. Caroline folded the note. Yes. What does she say? Caroline looked down at the handwriting. Yesterday Rachel had begged not to be named. Today she was withdrawing even that private truth. Caroline felt no anger toward her. Only a cold certainty. She says she was mistaken and that we must not write again. Simon's expression darkened. Do you believe her? I believe someone reached her. Outside, carriage wheels rattled over the Mayfair street. Inside, the room remained perfectly still. Lady Cynthia had arrived in London first. Now Caroline understood what she had been doing with the time. By Friday morning, Caroline had stopped thinking of Lady Cynthia's methods as rumour and begun to see their shape. The realization did not come from anything dramatic. It came from Mrs. Keene, who stood in the small sitting room at Melbury House with a memorandum of dates copied from the household records before leaving Kent and the expression of a woman troubled by what memory had finally arranged into order. The original wage book remained at Melbury Court. Mrs. Keene had brought only her own dated notes, made before the household departed, and Caroline was grateful for the distinction. They needed clarity, not the illusion that every useful object must be carried toward a scandal. Simon stood near the fireplace. The Dowager Duchess occupied a chair beside the window, her embroidery resting untouched in her lap. Caroline sat at the writing table with her locked case beside her. Inside it remained the black-enamel cufflink, Rachel Fenner's first confidential note, and the shorter message Rachel had sent the previous afternoon withdrawing what she had said. Caroline had read that second note twice and no more. She had not shown either letter to Simon. "I have remembered something else," Mrs. Keene said. "It was not entered in the records because such things rarely are." Simon's attention sharpened, but he did not interrupt. Mrs. Keene continued. When Rachel Fenner was dismissed, Lady Cynthia insisted the girl apologize first. Caroline looked up. Apologize for what? For misunderstanding Lord Eustace's manner toward her. The word settled heavily in the room. And the other women? Caroline asked. Mrs. Keene hesitated. And Mercer was required to say she had been impertinent before her reference could be discussed. Eliza Broom apologized for what Lady Cynthia called an insulting assumption. At the time, I thought each case separate. Did Lady Cynthia make the apology a condition of the reference? Simon asked. Not in language one could write down neatly, Your Grace. She would say a good household could not recommend a woman who persisted in accusing her betters of discourtesy. Then she would add that a proper apology might demonstrate restored judgment. Mrs. Keene's mouth tightened. Young women who need another place understand such sentences very well. Caroline felt cold despite the warmth of the room. The method was almost elegant in its cruelty. Nothing needed to be forged. No threat needed to be written. A gentleman behaved badly. A servant objected. Cynthia transformed the objection into an insult against rank. Then employment insecurity finished the work. Eustace creates the incident, Caroline said slowly. Lady Cynthia changes the meaning of it. The woman is told her future depends on accepting that revised meaning. Mrs. Keene nodded. Simon turned toward the mantel. Then I am going to Cynthia. Caroline's answer came before she had time to soften it. No, he looked at her. You cannot expect me to sit here while she intimidates women who once served my household. I expect you to consider what happens the moment she knows we understand the pattern. She already knows I expelled Eustace. That is not the same thing. Caroline rose. Right now she believes the matter begins with Molly. If you confront her about Rachel, she learns we reached someone from the past. If she is already pressuring Rachel, you confirm that Rachel matters. Simon's expression hardened with frustration. And if I do nothing, Cynthia continues. Not doing the first thing you want is not the same as doing nothing. Silence followed. The Dowager Duchess finally set her embroidery aside. Caroline is right. Simon glanced toward his mother. You have both become remarkably united in telling me when not to act. It is because you have had 41 years of practice being obeyed, the Dowager replied. Someone must provide variety. Caroline nearly smiled, but Simon's face remained serious. What would you do? He asked her. The question was becoming more frequent. She noticed that too. Wait until a witness chooses to speak. Protect Molly. Preserve what we know. Do not give Cynthia reason to believe she must destroy something we have not yet found. There may be nothing to find. Then confrontation gains us nothing except warning her. He paced once toward the window, then stopped. I dislike this. I know. You sound pleased by that. I am pleased you can dislike restraint and still practice it. His gaze returned to her, and for one suspended moment the room seemed quieter than it was. Then Mrs. Keene excused herself to attend to household matters, and the Dowager Duchess resumed her embroidery with enough concentration to make clear she was remaining nearby without intending to participate further. Simon did not leave. He stood by the window while Caroline opened a stack of invitations that had arrived that morning. "There is something I find difficult to admit," he said. Caroline glanced at him. "That must make it worth hearing." A faint expression touched his mouth. "I find it difficult not to act simply because I possess the means." He looked out toward the Mayfair street. "I can summon people, pay debts, secure positions, refuse doors to those I dislike, open them for those I favor. Most of my life, when I saw difficulty, I was taught that using those means was responsibility." Caroline set the invitations down. "Sometimes it is. And sometimes restraint is the action." He turned. "That sounds very convenient for the person asking me to remain still." "Then do not remain still. Ensure Molly's wages are secure. Ensure Mrs. Keene is not pressured. Refuse to let anyone dismiss a servant for speaking or for refusing to speak. But do not force Rachel to become useful to us merely because her story might help." Simon's eyes held hers. "You have a severe definition of help. I have been helped by people who expected gratitude to become obedience. It makes one attentive to the difference." He absorbed that without asking who or when. Caroline was grateful. The moment shifted when he crossed the room, stopping at a respectful distance. "You have spent 3 days telling me where my authority ends." "Only 3. It feels longer." This time she did smile. Simon looked down at his own hand, then held it out between them, palm upward. He did not reach for hers. He simply offered. Caroline's breath caught at the smallness of the gesture. There was nothing socially dramatic in it. No one would call it courtship. Yet it carried more meaning than a dozen gallant bows because Simon, who could command servants and unsettle entire drawing rooms with a glance, was waiting. Caroline looked toward the dowager. The older woman had not lifted her eyes from her embroidery. Caroline returned her attention to Simon. Slowly, she placed the tips of her fingers in his palm. His hand closed only enough to acknowledge the touch. He did not pull her closer. The warmth of his skin surprised her. So did the steadiness of her own response. They remained like that for several breaths. Then Caroline withdrew first, and Simon allowed her to do so without hesitation. No promise had been made. No forgiveness granted. Yet something had changed. Caroline returned to the invitations because she needed the ordinary task. The top card was cream, heavily embossed, and addressed to the Dowager Duchess. She opened it and read the formal invitation to a private musicale in Mayfair on Monday. A smaller folded note had been tucked inside. The handwriting belonged to one of the Dowager's acquaintances, not Cynthia, but the message named her. Caroline read it once, then handed it to the Duchess. "What is it?" Simon asked. His mother's face cooled. She passed the note to him. According to the writer, Lady Cynthia had told several guests that the musicale would finally settle the ugly rumours surrounding Melbury Court. More precisely, she had said, someone will finally expose Miss Sutton's invention. Simon lowered the paper. She has found someone. Caroline thought of Rachel's first note, then of the second. I was mistaken. Do not write again. A chill moved through her that had nothing to do with fear for herself. Yes, she said. And I think I know who. The Dowager's expression sharpened. Rachel Fenner. Caroline did not answer immediately. She had not been given permission to reveal Rachel's first confidence, but the threat itself had become public enough to reason from. Before she could decide what could properly be said, another servant entered carrying a message just delivered for Mrs. Keene. The housekeeper was summoned, read it in the hall, and returned with a face stripped of colour. Miss Sutton, she said quietly, the woman Lady Cynthia means to present at the musicale is Rachel Fenner. Caroline felt the room narrow around the name. Simon did not reach for her. He did not issue an order. He only looked at her and waited. That, more than anything, told Caroline how far the first 3 days had already carried him. Rachel had once begged not to be named. Yesterday she had withdrawn her words. Now Cynthia intended to place her before a room full of witnesses. Whatever happened on Monday, Caroline understood one thing with terrible clarity. The next battle would not be over whether Rachel had a voice. It would be over who had taught her what she was allowed to say. Saturday evening arrived with the peculiar calm of a room that knows trouble has already been invited. The private dinner was held in a Mayfair house whose hostess prided herself on gathering people who could disagree without raising their voices, which meant that every cruelty would arrive wrapped in perfect manners. Caroline entered beside the Dowager Duchess of Melbury and felt the attention turned toward her in small, disciplined increments. No one stared openly. Society had subtler instruments. A pause before greeting. A glance held half a second too long. A conversation lowered just as she approached. Caroline had spent years learning how to survive such rooms. What unsettled her now was that she no longer wished merely to survive them. Across the drawing room, Lady Cynthia Kirkham stood beside her brother in pale green silk, serene enough to suggest she had never threatened a servant's livelihood in her life. Lord Eustace looked equally composed. His evening coat was immaculate. Both cuffs were fastened, although Caroline knew the original left cufflink remained wrapped in clean paper inside her locked writing case at Melbury House. Whatever replacement he wore tonight did not change where the first one lay or how it had come into her possession. Cynthia greeted the Dowager with flawless courtesy. "Your Grace. London is fortunate you returned so quickly." "London rarely notices my absence until it needs something to discuss," the Dowager replied. Cynthia smiled as though she had been complimented. Then her eyes moved to Caroline. "Miss Sutton. I hope the city has not been unkind." "Cities have no manners of their own, Lady Cynthia. People supply them." Eustace's mouth tightened. Cynthia only smiled again. How philosophical. Simon arrived moments later, and Caroline was relieved that he did not cross the room directly to her. Any visible display of protection would have given Cynthia precisely the story she wanted. Instead, Simon greeted the hostess, spoke to an elderly baronet about parliamentary business, and acknowledged Caroline with the same measured respect he gave every other gentlewoman present. It was a restraint Caroline noticed because she knew it cost him something. Dinner was announced. Caroline took her assigned place halfway down the table, neither hidden nor elevated. Simon sat several places away. Cynthia was opposite Caroline, near enough that every word carried easily beneath the ordinary sound of silver against porcelain. The first courses passed without incident. That was worse than open hostility. Eustace discussed horseflesh with a viscount. Cynthia asked after a duchess recovering in Bath. Simon spoke little and observed much. Caroline answered questions when they came to her and refused the impulse to measure every silence for danger. It was Cynthia who finally moved. She turned to the woman beside her and said, with the easy tone of someone discussing household fashion, "There is something rather modern in the way certain women of dependent station discover that scandal gives them an importance society has otherwise denied them." The woman beside her gave an uncertain laugh. Caroline continued cutting a small piece of sole. Cynthia's gaze remained fixed upon her. "Of course," she added, "some people mistake interference for courage. It is difficult to know whether one should correct them or pity them." Caroline lifted her eyes. "Then perhaps the safest course is not to decide another person's motives without asking." A pause followed. Cynthia's smile sharpened. "You have become very devoted to questions. They are useful when the alternative is assumption." Simon's gaze met Caroline's from farther down the table. He said nothing. Caroline was grateful. Cynthia clearly expected him to intervene, because after a moment she leaned back and turned the conversation elsewhere. That silence from Simon did more for Caroline than any grand defense could have done. He had understood what she asked of him. "Stay. Do not answer for me." When the ladies withdrew after dinner, Caroline remained beside the Dowager while Cynthia moved among the other women with the smooth confidence of someone who believed Monday had already been won. Twice Caroline caught fragments of Rachel Fenner's name. Once she heard the word payment. She gave no sign. Rachel's first confidential note and later withdrawal remained locked at Melbury House. Caroline would not use either simply because Cynthia provoked her. When the gentleman rejoined them, Simon came no closer than propriety required. He spoke to Caroline only once before they left. "Are you well?" "Yes." His eyes searched hers. "Truly?" Caroline allowed herself one quiet truth. "No. But I am steady." Something changed in his face, not pity and not alarm. "Respect, perhaps. Then I will not mistake one for the other." The carriage ride back to Melbury House was brief. The Dowager retired soon after arrival, pleading fatigue, though Caroline suspected the older woman understood that silence sometimes served as a better chaperone than conversation. Still, the drawing-room door remained open, and the Dowager's maid moved within the adjoining chamber. Caroline stood near the mantel while Simon poured neither brandy nor wine, only water, and set the glass aside untouched. "You were right," he said. "About what?" "Cynthia wanted me to defend you." Caroline looked at him. "So that she could say I required it?" "Yes." He exhaled slowly. "I disliked remaining silent." "I know. You say that often. You make it easy." A faint smile touched him and vanished. Caroline moved toward the window. Mayfair beyond the glass was dark except for carriage lamps and the occasional glow from neighboring houses. Monday's musicale felt closer than 2 days away. "I am afraid of Rachel," she said. Simon turned sharply. "Afraid of her?" "Not of what she may say because I doubt myself. I am afraid of what fear can make a person say convincingly." She clasped her hands. If Cynthia has reached her, then Rachel may stand before a room full of people and tell them something she does not believe. And she may do it because she thinks the price of refusing is greater. Simon's expression hardened. "Then I should stop the musicale." Caroline shook her head. "That would only confirm that you are protecting me from testimony." "Then tell me what you want." The question landed differently now. Not what should I do? What do you want? Caroline looked at him. "Stay." He waited. "And do not answer for me." His jaw tightened once, then eased. "All right. Even if what she says is ugly." I said all right. "You may regret it." I have already learned that regretting restraint is less dangerous than regretting command. The words were quiet. Caroline felt something inside her loosen. Simon stepped closer, but not close enough to crowd her. Then he extended his hand between them, palm upward, just as he had the day before. He did not touch her. He waited. Caroline looked down at his open hand. Yesterday, she had placed only her fingertips in it and withdrawn after several breaths. Tonight the room felt different. So did she. Slowly, she placed her hand fully in his. Simon's fingers closed around hers with careful warmth. He did not pull. He did not turn the gesture into possession. They simply stood there, hand in hand, while the clock on the mantel marked the seconds. Caroline became aware of his thumb resting still against the side of her hand, of the steadiness of his breathing, of how unusual it felt to accept comfort without owing anything in return. She could have withdrawn. She did not. Instead, after a long silence, she tightened her fingers around his first. Simon looked at her then, and the restraint in his expression was almost more intimate than touch. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For trusting me enough to ask me to do less." Caroline's throat tightened unexpectedly. "Do not make me regret it." "I'll try very hard not to." A footman appeared at the open door carrying a folded note on a small tray. "For Miss Sutton." Caroline released Simon's hand and took the message. The paper was plain. The writing belonged to an acquaintance of Mrs. Keene who had been helping pass neutral messages through servant circles. Caroline opened it. Only one sentence had been written. Rachel Fenner will attend Lady Wexham's musicale on Monday and has agreed to speak before the music begins. Caroline read the line twice. Simon did not ask to see it. "Rachel," he said. "Yes." "Will she come?" Caroline folded the note carefully. "She will come." Outside, a carriage rattled past and disappeared into the London night. Inside, Caroline felt the warmth of Simon's hand lingering in hers and understood that comfort had changed nothing about Monday. Rachel would stand before society. Cynthia would be ready. And Caroline would have to endure whatever came without stealing another woman's voice to save her own. By Monday morning, Caroline had discovered that dread possessed its own manners. It did not always arrive as panic. Sometimes it helped a woman fasten her gloves correctly, answer the Dowager Duchess with perfect composure, and step into a carriage knowing that before the hour was over strangers might decide what kind of woman she was. Lady Wexham's house in Mayfair had already filled when they arrived. Music stands waited near the far wall. Candles burned despite the pale daylight. Ladies in silk and gentlemen in dark coats gathered in conversational knots that broke and reformed as new guests entered. Caroline felt the room notice her almost at once. Simon arrived separately and did not cross immediately to her. That restraint had become familiar enough that she understood it as care. The Dowager remained at Caroline's side until Lady Wexham approached with a strained smile and explained that Lady Cynthia had requested a few moments before the music began. "She says there is a misunderstanding she wishes to settle," Lady Wexham said. The phrasing was courteous enough to conceal a public execution. Caroline looked past her. Cynthia stood near the pianoforte, serene in lavender silk. Eustace was beside her. And a few feet away stood Rachel Fenner. Caroline had imagined Rachel many times since reading her first note. She had pictured fear, fatigue, perhaps anger. The woman before her looked younger than 27, not because her face was youthful but because anxiety had stripped it of everything except obedience. Her hands were clasped too tightly at her waist. Her eyes did not once meet Caroline's. Simon came to stand several feet away, close enough to intervene if the gathering turned disorderly, far enough not to appear to shield Caroline from a question. Cynthia waited until the conversations quieted. "I regret troubling our hostess," she began, "but Miss Sutton has allowed a most damaging story to circulate concerning my brother. A story founded, she claims, upon concern for women formerly employed in the Melbury household." Caroline said nothing. Cynthia turned toward Rachel. "Miss Fenner asked to speak because she is one of those women." Rachel's face lost what little color it possessed. Caroline felt her own heartbeat slow rather than quicken. Somewhere in Melbury House, inside Caroline's locked writing case, lay Rachel's first note. "Lord Eustace frightened me. Lady Cynthia required me to apologize." Beside it lay the later withdrawal. "I was mistaken. Do not write again." Caroline had not brought either letter. Even if she had, she knew already that she would not use them without Rachel's consent. Cynthia looked pleased by Caroline's silence. "Miss Fenner," she said gently, "tell them what Miss Sutton offered you." The word offered changed the room before Rachel spoke. Heads turned. A gentleman near the mantel frowned. Lady Wexham sat down without seeming aware she had done so. Rachel swallowed. "Miss Sutton sent word to me." Caroline heard murmurs. Rachel continued. "She wanted me to say Lord Eustace had behaved improperly." "That is not what the message said," Caroline replied. Her voice was calm. "You were told you owed us nothing and could refuse to answer." Cynthia lifted one hand. "Please. Let the woman finish." The irony was so precise that Caroline almost admired it. Rachel stared at the carpet. "Afterward, Miss Sutton offered me money if I would say Lord Eustace had frightened me." The room changed. It was not loud. That made it worse. The silence became judgment. Caroline felt it settle around her in layers. Paid companion. Dependent gentlewoman. Woman who had suddenly become visible by accusing a gentleman. Now, perhaps, woman who purchased victims. Eustace looked almost bored. Cynthia looked wounded on his behalf. Simon looked only at Caroline. He did not ask Rachel another question. He did not turn toward Cynthia. Is it true? He asked. Caroline met his eyes. No, nothing in his face shifted toward doubt. Then that is your answer. Cynthia laughed softly. How touching. But surely even Miss Sutton understands that denial is not proof. Simon turned to her. Nor is accusation. Then why would Rachel Fenner lie? Cynthia asked. There it was. The question was meant for the room more than for Caroline. Caroline knew the answer was locked away in Rachel's own handwriting. She could describe the first note. She could quote the line about fear. She could announce that Rachel had once begged not to be named. The effect would be immediate. Rachel would become the liar instead of Caroline. Cynthia's story might fracture. Caroline's reputation might begin repairing itself before the first piece of music was played. She looked at Rachel. The woman's hands had begun to tremble. Caroline understood then that the cruelest use of a confidence was not always exposing its contents. Sometimes it was exposing the fact that someone had trusted you at all. Miss Fenner wrote to me privately, Caroline said. Rachel's head jerked up. Cynthia's eye sharpened. Caroline continued, anything she told me was told in confidence. I will not use it to save my name unless she gives me leave. The murmurs grew louder. Cynthia's expression brightened with false astonishment. How convenient. You possess a mysterious letter that proves your virtue, yet no one may see it. I did not say it proved my virtue. Then what does it prove? That a woman once believed I would keep her confidence. Rachel looked at her then. Only for a second. Shame crossed her face so nakedly that Caroline had to resist the instinct to protect her from the room. Protection offered without permission could become another form of control. She had learned that partly from Simon. He, in turn, was learning it from her. Eustace stepped forward. This has gone far enough. Rachel has spoken. Miss Sutton has nothing but implication. Simon moved between Eustace and the centre of the room, not aggressively, but with enough authority that conversation stopped entirely. No one will question Miss Fenner further unless she wishes it. Cynthia stared at him. Simon, she has just accused a woman under your roof of bribery. And Miss Sutton has denied it. You believe her? I believe she knows whether she offered money. Cynthia's voice cooled. That is not impartial. I am not presiding over a court. Simon's tone remained level. This is a private music-hall that you have turned into a public accusation. It will not become an interrogation. Caroline felt every eye shift toward him and then back to her. He had done exactly what she asked. He had stayed. He had not answered for her. He had only stopped the room from devouring Rachel because Cynthia had offered her up. Lady Wexham finally rose. Perhaps we should begin the music. Cynthia looked dissatisfied, but she had achieved enough. The accusation had been made. Caroline could feel it already spreading through whispered conclusions. She would leave the room less respectable in the eyes of many than when she entered it. Rachel stepped backward as though eager to disappear. Caroline did not follow. She would not force another conversation simply because she needed one. The musicians began arranging their sheets. Guests shifted toward their seats. Simon remained where he was until Caroline moved first. She passed Rachel near the doorway to the adjoining salon. For one heartbeat, no one stood close enough to hear. Rachel's lips barely moved. I'm sorry. Caroline stopped. Rachel did not look at her. I'm so sorry. Then she was gone into the passage before Caroline could answer. The apology did not clear Caroline's name. It did something more dangerous. It confirmed that the lie had cost Rachel something too. Later, as the first violin began, Simon came to stand beside Caroline without touching her. "Mrs. Keene learned something this morning," he said quietly. "About Rachel." Caroline looked at him. "What?" "Her younger sister is seeking a new domestic place." Caroline understood at once why that mattered. So did Simon. His expression hardened with purpose. "Then perhaps we can remove the reason Rachel is afraid." Caroline turned toward him, hearing the old instinct beneath the new intention. Simon believed he had found a way to help. Caroline feared he had found a way to make the truth look purchased. By Tuesday morning, Simon had already decided how to solve Rachel Fenner's problem. That was precisely what frightened Caroline. She found him in the smaller library at Melbury House with 3 letters open before him, one addressed to a respectable household in Bloomsbury, another to a solicitor who handled charitable rents for several ducal properties, and a third not yet sealed. The Dowager Duchess sat near the window reading correspondence of her own, present enough to preserve propriety and silent enough to make clear that whatever passed between Caroline and her son would not be softened for either of them. Simon looked up as Caroline entered. "I have a way to remove Cynthia's leverage." Caroline stopped before the writing table. "What way?" "Rachel's younger sister needs a place. Lady Bramford is seeking a second housemaid and owes my mother a favor. The family also appears to be behind on rent by a modest amount. If that burden is cleared and the girl is placed somewhere secure, Rachel will no longer have reason to fear what Cynthia can do to them." Caroline looked at the letters again. His reasoning was neat. Compassionate, even. That made the danger easier to miss. "Have you sent anything?" she asked. "Not yet." Relief came so quickly that she had to conceal it. "Then please do not." Simon's expression changed. "You think helping them is wrong?" "No. I think helping them now is dangerous. Rachel lied before a room full of people because Cynthia has some hold over her. If we remove that hold, she may speak freely. Or everyone may say she changed her story because the Duke of Melbury found her sister a position and paid her family's rent." His jaw tightened. "That is not why I would do it. Your intention is not the only thing that matters." He pushed back from the desk. "Caroline, these women have been left vulnerable because people with influence used that vulnerability against them. I have influence enough to end it. And that is exactly why you must be careful." The Dowager lowered her letter but did not speak. Caroline continued. "If Rachel speaks because she fears Cynthia, she is not free. If she speaks because she owes you, she is still not free." Simon stood. "You are equating a threat with assistance." "No. I am saying both can shape what a frightened person believes she is allowed to say. I would ask for nothing in return. You would not need to. She would know who secured the position. She would know who paid the rent. She would know what version of events pleased you." His face hardened, not with anger exactly, but with the pain of hearing his good intention placed beside the very conduct he despised. "So I should let them struggle." "No." Caroline kept her voice steady. "You should wait until Rachel's testimony no longer stands between her family and your favor. If she speaks freely first, help offered later can remain help. If you help now, every word she says afterward can be called purchased." Simon looked down at the open letters. The room remained quiet except for the faint scrape of a carriage outside in the street. Caroline knew what it cost him to leave a solvable problem unsolved. Power had trained him to believe delay was negligence. Yet sometimes the cleanest thing a powerful man could do was refuse to make himself indispensable. "There is another matter," she said. "If Rachel learns that you have discovered her sister's difficulty, she may feel watched." Simon looked at her sharply. "I learned it through Mrs. Keene. She may not know that. She may only know that a duke has reached into the most private weakness of her family within a day of her public accusation." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the certainty had gone. "I nearly made the same mistake again." "Not the same mistake." "Close enough." He crossed to the writing table and gathered the 3 letters. For one alarming second Caroline thought he meant to seal them. Instead, he tore the unfinished sheet cleanly in half and placed the others face down. Nothing has been sent. No position offered. No rent paid. Good. His eyes lifted to hers. That word should not feel as unpleasant as it does. You are allowed to dislike the right decision. The Dowager gave a faint hum of approval from the window. Simon almost smiled, but his attention stayed on Caroline. I am sorry. She did not answer immediately. For wanting to help. For assuming that because I could remove Rachel's difficulty, I was entitled to decide when and how. Caroline nodded once. Thank you. He did not ask whether she forgave him. He had learned that much. The distance between them remained, and Caroline allowed it to remain. The hand-holding of Saturday, the quiet trust that had followed, could not become a convenient bridge over every mistake. If something between them was becoming real, it needed the strength to survive correction without demanding immediate tenderness. By midday, London had found a fresh version of Caroline's disgrace. A folded message arrived from Lady Cynthia through a mutual acquaintance, not addressed in Cynthia's own hand but carrying her meaning unmistakably. Caroline read it in the Dowager's morning room while Simon stood near the mantel. The note advised that Miss Sutton might spare herself further humiliation by leaving London before another woman came forward to expose her methods. The wording was polite. The threat beneath it was not. Simon held out his hand. May I? Caroline gave him the note. He read it once and returned it. She wants you gone before Rachel changes her account. Or before I find out why she gave it. Then we should find Rachel today. Caroline shook her head. No, Simon stared at her. After everything yesterday. Especially after yesterday. She folded Cynthia's message and set it aside. Rachel already knows I want the truth. She also knows I kept her confidence when exposing it would have helped me. If I go to her now, I become one more person demanding something from her. She accused you of bribery. And apologized when no one could hear. That does not restore your name. No. But restoring my name cannot become an excuse to corner her. Simon paced once across the rug. So we wait again. We wait for her to choose whether there is anything more she wants to say. And if she never does. Caroline felt the cost of the answer before she gave it. Then I live with what society believes until the truth changes by some other means. His expression revealed how deeply he hated that possibility. You would accept that. I would not accept the lie. I would accept that Rachel is not mine to spend against it. The words quieted him. Caroline looked toward the window, where Mayfair continued as though reputations were not being ruined behind drawing-room doors. Part of her wanted action too. She wanted to go to Rachel, take her hands, ask what Cynthia had threatened, and promise safety. But safety offered at the wrong moment could become another demand. I will not leave London, Caroline said. Cynthia should not mistake restraint for retreat. Simon looked at her. Then neither will I. That is your choice. Yes. The emphasis was deliberate. Caroline heard it. Late in the afternoon, when the house had settled into the quieter interval before dinner, a footman brought a small folded note to the morning room. For Miss Sutton. Delivered by hand. Caroline recognized none of the writing on the outside. She broke the fold carefully. For words stood alone on the page. Come without his grace. Her pulse quickened. Simon did not step closer. Rachel, he asked. Caroline read the line once more. There was no signature, but she knew. Yes. Where? A second line beneath the first gave a time and a respectable address belonging to an elderly relation of Rachel's near Bloomsbury. Caroline folded the paper. Tomorrow morning. Simon's first instinct flashed across his face. Go with her. Arrange protection. Question the witness. He mastered all three before speaking. Do you want my carriage? Caroline considered. Your mother's carriage, with her maid. Nothing that announces you. Done. And you will not follow. His mouth tightened. I won't. Caroline held his gaze. Even if you think I may need you. Especially then. It was not ease that made the answer meaningful. It was effort. Caroline slipped Rachel's message into her reticule. Upstairs, the cufflink and both earlier notes remained secured inside her locked writing case. She would take none of them to Bloomsbury unless Rachel herself asked. Tomorrow, for the first time since the scandal began, Caroline would meet the woman at its center without a duke, without an audience, and without any promise of rescue between them. Wednesday morning brought a second message from Rachel before Caroline had finished dressing. It contained only 5 words. Bring the first letter, please. Caroline read the line twice, then crossed to her locked writing case. The black enamel cufflink remained wrapped in clean paper where she had left it. Rachel's later withdrawal, the one stating that she had been mistaken and did not wish to be contacted again, remained beside it. Caroline took only Rachel's first confidential note, folded it exactly along its existing creases, and slipped it into her reticule. She locked the case again and kept the key with her. The Dowager Duchess's carriage waited below. Her maid accompanied Caroline as promised, while Mrs. Keene came as well at Caroline's request and sat opposite her during the journey toward Bloomsbury. Simon did not appear before they left. Caroline knew that was deliberate. He had promised not to follow, and he had understood that even a farewell in the entrance hall might make the meeting feel as though the Duke of Melbury stood invisibly behind her. The address Rachel had given belonged to an elderly aunt who occupied modest but respectable rooms on a quiet street. Mrs. Keene remained with the aunt in the front parlour. The dowager's maid waited nearby. Caroline was shown into a smaller sitting room whose door remained partly open. Rachel stood beside the window. She wore a plain brown dress and had clasped her hands so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. "Thank you for coming," Rachel said. "You asked me to." Caroline did not move closer than necessary. "And His Grace?" "At Melbury House." Rachel looked toward the open door. "He doesn't know what I'm going to say." "Neither do I." Something in Rachel's face trembled. "You could have brought him." "You asked me not to." Rachel lowered her gaze. "Lady Cynthia said you wouldn't respect that once your own reputation was at stake." Caroline felt the sting but did not defend herself. "Lady Cynthia has been wrong about me before. She said you'd make me tell the Duke everything. I will not make you tell anyone anything." Rachel's mouth tightened. "Then why are you here?" "Because you asked me to come." The simplicity of the answer seemed to undo something. Rachel turned toward the window and pressed her fingertips against the sill. For several moments she said nothing. Caroline waited. At last Rachel whispered, "I lied on Monday. I know you said something you did not believe." Rachel looked back sharply. "How can you know?" "Because you apologized when no one else could hear." Tears rose in Rachel's eyes, but she blinked them away. "That doesn't prove anything." "No. It tells me only that the words cost you something." Rachel drew a slow breath. "My sister is 17. She's trying to find a good domestic place. We have an aunt who can keep us fed, but she cannot keep us both indefinitely. My sister had nearly secured a position in a respectable household." Caroline said nothing. "Lady Cynthia found out." Rachel's voice became flatter, as if emotion could be controlled by refusing to give it shape. "She sent someone to tell me that if I didn't speak at the music-hall, my sister's character would become doubtful. She said a young woman connected to a liar would not be suitable for decent service." Caroline felt anger rise, cold and precise. "Did she offer you money?" "No." "Did she threaten your sister directly?" "Not in words anyone would call a threat." Rachel gave a bitter little laugh. "She said she would be sorry if certain questions had to be asked about our family." Caroline understood. Cynthia's weapons were always sentences that could later be called misunderstandings. Rachel twisted her fingers together. "So I said you offered me money." Yes. You should hate me. That would be convenient. Rachel stared at her. Caroline continued, but I think Lady Cynthia has relied on frightened women believing they must carry all the shame themselves. Rachel's face crumpled for one heartbeat before she mastered it. Last autumn, Lord Eustace stopped me near the back stairs at Melbury Court. He wanted me to meet him after the household had gone quiet. I refused. He stood too close and would not move when I asked. She swallowed. Nothing worse happened because a footman came through the passage. But I told Lady Cynthia afterward because I thought a lady would understand. And she did. Rachel gave a broken smile. She understood perfectly. She said I had mistaken friendliness for impropriety. Then she told me that if I wished to keep a good reference, I must apologize for insulting her brother. Caroline remembered Mrs. Keene's entry. Impertinence toward Lady Cynthia Kirkham. 5 words that concealed all of this. Did you apologize? Not properly. I said I was sorry the matter had caused offense. She wanted me to say I imagined it. I wouldn't. Rachel looked down. My reference changed. Caroline felt the full structure of Cynthia's method settle into place. Not one frightened servant. Not one social misunderstanding. A repeated system in which a woman could keep her future only by rewriting her own memory. Does Lady Cynthia know you wrote to me before the musicale? Caroline asked. Rachel shook her head. No. I never told her. Then your first note remains yours. Rachel looked confused. Caroline opened her reticule and withdrew the folded paper. She held it out. Rachel did not take it immediately. What are you doing? Returning it. But you need that. It could help me. Then why would you give it back? Because you asked me to bring it. Rachel stared at the note as if it were more dangerous than any accusation. If you keep it, you can prove I changed my story. Perhaps. But you wrote it believing I would protect your confidence. Caroline extended her hand a little farther. This belongs to you. Rachel finally took the letter. Her fingers trembled around it. You know I could burn it. Yes. Or deny I wrote it. Yes. Or keep refusing to speak. Yes. Rachel looked at her with naked disbelief. And you'll still let me take it. It was never mine in the way that matters. Silence filled the small room. Outside, carriage wheels passed over the street. In the adjoining parlor, someone shifted a teacup. Rachel pressed the note against her palm. I don't know if I can speak publicly again. Then do not decide now. But your name, my name, is my responsibility. I helped damage it. You were coerced. I still said the words. Both things can be true. Rachel turned away, breathing carefully. Give me 1 day. You have it. And you won't send anyone. No, not the Duke. Especially not the Duke. When Caroline returned to Melbury House, Simon was in the morning room, standing beside the mantel with a letter open in his hand. He folded it the instant she entered. The Dowager Duchess sat nearby, and Caroline was grateful again for her unobtrusive presence. Simon looked at Caroline but did not ask what Rachel had said until she had removed her gloves and sat down. Did you see her? Yes. May I ask whether she is safe? As far as I can tell, yes. He waited. Caroline could see the questions behind his restraint. She gave me permission to tell you only this, Caroline said. She was coerced. She needs time. Simon's jaw tightened. By Cynthia? Caroline paused. She did not authorize me to give you the details. The old impatience flickered across his face. Then disappeared. Understood. Caroline had not realized how tired she was until that moment. The whole week seemed to descend upon her at once. The accusations. The careful rooms. Rachel shaking hands. The knowledge that every truth had to be protected not only from villains, but sometimes from allies who wanted to use it too quickly. She closed her eyes briefly. "Caroline." Simon's voice had softened. She opened them. "I am tired," she admitted. It was the first time she had said it aloud. Not frightened. Not defeated. Simply tired. Simon took one step closer and stopped. "May I hold you?" The question touched something deeper than a command ever could. Caroline looked at him, then rose. She closed the distance herself. His arms came around her carefully, not tightly, and for one moment she remained still as though learning the shape of being comforted without being managed. Then she lifted her arms and held him back. Simon exhaled against her hair. Neither spoke. The embrace lasted only as long as Caroline chose it to. When she stepped away, he let her go immediately. That evening, shortly before dinner, another small message arrived by hand. Caroline opened it alone. Rachel's writing was steadier this time. "If Molly is willing, I will speak too." Thursday morning began with a question Simon had earned the right to ask precisely because he had learned how not to demand the answer. Caroline found him in the Dowager Duchess's morning room shortly after breakfast, standing beside the window with his hands clasped behind him while his mother read correspondence at her escritoire. The black-enamel cufflink remained upstairs in Caroline's locked writing case, still wrapped in paper. Rachel Fenner's first confidential letter was no longer there. Caroline had returned it to Rachel the previous morning, exactly as Rachel had requested. Only Rachel's later withdrawal remained among Caroline's private papers. Simon waited until Caroline had taken her usual chair before speaking. "You told me yesterday that Rachel was coerced and needed time." "Yes. And there was something she had written to you earlier." Caroline looked at him. "There was." He hesitated. "Do you still have it?" "No. I returned it to her." Simon absorbed that without surprise. "Because it belonged to her?" "Yes." He moved one hand from behind his back, then let it fall loosely at his side. "Would it strengthen what we can establish if she allowed it to be shown?" Caroline could have softened the answer. She chose not to. "Yes." Something tightened in his face. It was not suspicion. It was the discomfort of a man being shown a tool he could use and told he must leave it untouched. "And you gave it back knowing that?" "I did. If Rachel speaks again publicly and Cynthia accuses her of changing her story because we pressured her, the earlier letter might matter." "It might." Simon was silent for several seconds. Caroline could almost see the old instinct assembling itself. "Ask to see the letter. Send for Rachel. Place the paper before witnesses. Establish dates. Use the authority of Melbury to bring order to confusion." He did none of those things. "Then I shall never ask to see it unless she offers it herself." Caroline had expected restraint. She had not expected the quiet certainty with which he chose it. "Even if refusing to ask makes this harder." "Especially then." His gaze held hers. "If I require her confidence in order to believe that you did not bribe her, then I have learned nothing." The Dowager Duchess turned one page at her escritoire. Caroline suspected she had not read a word of it. "Thank you," Caroline said. Simon gave a faint, almost rueful smile. "I am beginning to understand that being thanked for doing less can be strangely exhausting. Practice may improve your endurance. You have great faith in practice. I have greater faith in it than in sudden transformation." Before he could answer, Mrs. Keene entered. Molly Finch followed her. The maid carried herself carefully, though the bruising at her wrist had faded enough that only a trace of discoloration remained beneath the edge of her sleeve. Caroline did not look at it for long. Molly should not have to become evidence every time she entered a room. Mrs. Keene addressed the Dowager first. "Your Grace," Molly asked to speak. Simon remained where he was. "Only if she wishes." Molly looked at Caroline, then at Simon. "I heard Miss Fenner might speak again." Caroline nodded. She said she would if you were willing. Molly swallowed. Then I'm willing. Simon's expression remained controlled. You understand that you do not owe anyone that decision. Yes, Your Grace. Mrs. Keene spoke before Molly could lose courage. And your wages remain the same whether you speak or not. Your place remains secure. If you decide tomorrow that you want no part in it, that will not alter. Molly looked at the housekeeper with visible relief. Thank you. Caroline asked, do you want anyone to tell the story for you? Molly shook her head. No, miss. If I speak, I'll say what happened myself. Then that is what you should do. Simon did not utter a word. Caroline saw how deliberate his silence was. Once, he would have promised protection in a tone large enough to fill the room. Now he understood that Molly already had a voice. What she needed was freedom from punishment for using it. After Molly left with Mrs. Keene, Simon turned toward Caroline. There is one other piece. She waited. Eustace's valet has agreed to answer a single factual question. How was he approached? Simon understood why she asked. Through a servant known to my household. No money was offered. No position was suggested. He was told he could refuse. And he agreed. Reluctantly. What can he establish? Only that on the morning of the 4th, before breakfast at Melbury Court, he fastened both of Eustace's cufflinks himself. When Eustace returned to his room to pack after I ordered him from the estate, the left cufflink was gone. Caroline considered the information carefully. Nothing about the passage. Nothing. He did not see it. Nothing about Molly. Nothing. Good. Simon lifted one eyebrow. Good? A witness who says only what he knows is more useful than one encouraged to complete a story for us. He has made it very clear he will do no more. Then we should make it equally clear we expect no more. Simon inclined his head. Agreed. By noon another message arrived from Rachel. This one was addressed to Caroline but contained no confidence Simon could not know. Rachel stated plainly that she intended to retract her accusation at the next appropriate gathering and say that Caroline had never offered her money. She also wished to explain, in her own words, why she had lied. Caroline read the message once, then carried it downstairs. Simon was in the library with the Dowager when she entered. Rachel has made her decision, Caroline said. He stood. May I know it? Yes. She intends to retract what she said at the music-hall. She will also explain why she said it. Simon's shoulders eased, but he did not smile. Did she authorize the reason to be repeated before she speaks? Caroline looked at him with surprise. No, then I will not ask. Something warm and painful moved through her chest. He was no longer merely following rules she had given him. He was beginning to understand the principle beneath them. The next interruption came less than an hour later. Lady Cynthia Kirkham had sent a formal note through a mutual acquaintance. Its language was smooth, almost dignified. She requested that Miss Sutton attend a limited gathering at Melbury House the following Monday and retract the accusations that had damaged Lord Eustace Kirkham's reputation. Several persons who had heard the matter discussed at Lady Wexham's music-hall would be invited, Cynthia wrote, so that the correction might be as public as the injury. Caroline finished reading and gave the note to Simon. His face became very still. She is asking to come here. Because she still believes Rachel will hold to the story. Or because she believes you will refuse the meeting and look guilty. Caroline nodded. Then we accept. Simon looked at her. You are certain? Yes. She will try to make you answer her version of every question. Then I will answer only what belongs to me. He glanced at Cynthia's note again. I can set the terms. Caroline waited. Simon caught himself. No. Let me say that differently. I can ensure no one is shouted down, threatened, or prevented from leaving. You decide what you say. Caroline felt a smile threaten despite the seriousness of the moment. That is better. I thought it might be. He set the note aside. Then Monday. Monday. For a few seconds neither moved. Simon's hand rested against the edge of the desk. Caroline remembered the first time he had offered it to her, palm upward, as though asking permission to cross a distance he could easily have crossed without asking. She looked at his hand now. This time she did not wait. Caroline reached across the small space between them and placed her fingers in his. Simon went completely still. Then his hand turned beneath hers and closed gently around it. He did not tighten his grip until she did first. The warmth was familiar now, but the meaning had changed. This was not consolation after humiliation. It was not reassurance before danger. Caroline had chosen the contact without being invited. Simon looked at her with an expression so unguarded that she had to look away for a moment. "Caroline," he said quietly. "Yes?" "Before that room hears you on Monday, there is something I must say to you without witnesses." Saturday afternoon settled over Melbury House with a muted stillness that felt almost ceremonial. 2 days remained before Lady Cynthia's demanded gathering, yet Caroline could already feel Monday approaching in every quiet preparation. Mrs. Keene had confirmed that Molly wished to speak. Rachel had sent word that she would retract her accusation and explain her own coercion. Lord Eustace's valet had agreed to state only what he knew about the missing cufflink. No one had been promised money. No one had been threatened with dismissal. No one had been instructed what conclusion society should draw. Caroline had insisted upon those boundaries until they no longer felt like rules imposed on Simon, but principles he had begun to defend himself. The black-enamel cufflink remained upstairs in Caroline's locked writing case, wrapped in the same clean paper. Rachel's original confidential letter was no longer there because Caroline had returned it to Rachel. The later note withdrawing her first account remained among Caroline's private papers, but it would not be needed on Monday unless Rachel herself chose to mention it. Mrs. Keene's original household wage book remained safely at Melbury Court in Kent. Only her dated memorandum had travelled to London. Nothing important had shifted without being accounted for. Caroline took comfort in that. Truth had become fragile enough without careless hands moving pieces of it. Simon had asked to speak with her before the public meeting, and late that afternoon she found him waiting in the conservatory. The glass roof held the fading light in a pale wash above orange trees and pots of early geraniums. The adjoining salon door stood open. The Dowager Duchess sat there with correspondence on her lap, close enough for propriety and far enough to grant them privacy of tone. Simon did not begin immediately. He stood beside a narrow table with one hand resting against its edge, looking less like the Duke of Melbury than a man trying to decide whether honesty could be offered without becoming another demand. Caroline stopped several feet from him. "You said there was something you needed to tell me." "There is." He drew a breath. "Several things, actually. I have been arranging them in my mind as though the right order might make them easier to say." "Has it?" No, that almost made her smile. Simon looked directly at her. "On the 4th of May, I told you to apologize before I had asked what happened. I made your continued place in my house depend upon surrendering your own account of what you witnessed. I have apologized for that before, but I have not yet told you plainly what I think the harm was." Caroline remained silent. "I treated order as more important than your judgment," he said. "I treated Cynthia's rank and confidence as if they made her account safer than yours. And I used my authority to make the choice costlier for you than for anyone else in the room." The word struck with greater force because he did not dress them in remorse. He named them. "Yes," Caroline said quietly. "You did." Simon accepted the answer without flinching. "Then on Tuesday, after Rachel accused you publicly, I nearly made another mistake. I wanted to secure her sister a position and pay the family's rent because I thought removing hardship would make Rachel free to speak. You meant well. That is not the defense I intend to use." His voice remained steady. "I would have entangled her truth with my favor. I almost replaced Cynthia's pressure with my own influence and called it rescue." Caroline felt something tighten in her chest. Simon continued. You stopped me before anything was sent. No money changed hands. No employment was offered. But the fact that you had to stop me matters. It does. I am sorry for that too. There was no plea in his face. No expectation that apology should immediately become absolution. Caroline had known men who said sorry as if they were purchasing silence from the injured person. Simon was not doing that. Thank you, she said. He looked toward the open doorway of the adjoining salon, then back at her. There is something else you should know before Monday. Caroline waited. If Cynthia is exposed, if Eustace is publicly contradicted, if every person in that room finally understands what happened, and afterward you decide that you want nothing from me beyond ordinary courtesy, I will still correct every falsehood I can. Molly's place will remain secure. Rachel will not be punished for changing her account. Mrs. Keene will have my full authority to review damaged references. None of that depends upon whether you forgive me. None of it depends upon whether you remain at Melbury House. And none of it depends upon whether you ever return what I feel for you. Caroline's breath caught on the last sentence, though he did not allow her time to answer it yet. That is why I trust you now, she said. Simon went still. Not because you can protect me, she continued. Because you are beginning to understand that protection offered only in exchange for affection is merely another bargain. I do understand. And because you changed your behavior before you knew whether I would reward you for it. His expression softened, almost painfully. I hoped you had noticed. I notice more than is convenient. That has been evident from the beginning. A small silence opened between them, gentler than the others they had shared. Simon crossed to the table where a single sheet of paper lay. I wrote down the factual structure for Monday. Not arguments. Only ownership and limits. I wanted you to see whether I have misunderstood anything. Caroline stepped closer. He did not hand her the page as though it were an order. He turned it so they could both read. The cufflink is yours, he said. In your locked writing case. You decide when it appears. Yes. Molly owns her testimony. Yes. Rachel owns hers. We do not use her first letter unless she independently chooses to introduce it. Correct. Mrs. Keene has custody of her own dated memorandum. The original household book remains at Melbury Court. Caroline nodded. And Eustace's valet speaks only to the fact that he fastened both cufflinks before breakfast on the 4th, and that one was missing when Eustace returned to pack. Nothing more. Nothing more. Simon folded the paper once. No new witness. No hidden document. No surprise proof. Good. You sound disappointed that I have not discovered a secret confession in a desk drawer. On the contrary. I am relieved that truth has not suddenly become theatrical. He smiled briefly. Then the smile faded, and the air between them changed. Caroline. She looked at him. I have fallen in love with you. There was no flourish. No attempt to make the declaration beautiful enough to compel an answer. He said it as he had said everything else that afternoon, with the discipline of a man who had learned that truth did not become more honest when dressed for society. Caroline felt her heartbeat deepen. Simon continued before she could speak. You do not have to answer me. Not now. Not before Monday. Perhaps not at all. I am telling you because if I stand beside you in that room, I do not want affection to be another fact I have concealed while claiming to value openness. Caroline searched his face. When did you know? I am not certain. Perhaps when you returned Rachel's letter knowing it could have cleared you. Perhaps before that. I only know that somewhere between wanting to act for you and learning to stand still beside you, you became the person whose judgment I most feared losing. The honesty in his voice left her unsteady in a way humiliation never had. Simon took one small step nearer, then stopped. May I kiss you? The question held no assumption. Caroline could refuse and nothing essential would be withdrawn. She knew that now. Yes, she said. Simon still waited. The final distance belonged to her. Caroline closed it. His hand rose slowly to her face but stopped just short until she turned slightly into his touch. Then his fingers rested gently against her cheek. The kiss was quiet, warm, unrestrained, carrying none of the urgency that would have made it feel like escape. Caroline kissed him back. She chose the closeness. When they parted, Simon did not hold her there. His hand lowered. Caroline remained near him because she wished to. For several breaths neither spoke. Then she slipped one hand into her pocket and closed her fingers around the smooth grey pebble from Margate. Its familiar shape steadied her, but for the first time she did not feel as though she were standing alone against the tide. "On Monday," she said, "when that room hears us, do not defend my words." Simon watched her carefully. "What should I do?" Caroline met his eyes. "Admit yours." Understanding moved across his face. He nodded once. "I will." Caroline kept the pebble in her own hand. Simon did not ask to hold it. And when Monday came, she knew he would not stand in front of her truth. He would stand beside it, after first telling the room exactly where he himself had failed. Monday evening came to Melbury House with music, candlelight, and the deliberate politeness of people who knew they had not truly been invited for either. Simon had kept the gathering limited to those who had been present, or nearly present, when Rachel Fenner accused Caroline at Lady Wexham's musicale. No curious crowd had been admitted merely because scandal made good entertainment. The Dowager Duchess received each guest with calm formality. Mrs. Keene remained close enough to be called when needed. Molly waited in a nearby room by her own choice. Rachel arrived separately and spoke to no one before the music began. Caroline entered last among the household, wearing a simple ivory gown with no jewels beyond a small brooch belonging to her mother. The grey Margate pebble remained in her pocket. The black-enamel Kirkham cufflink did not. For the first time since the 4th of May, Caroline had removed it from her locked writing case. It now rested wrapped in clean paper inside her reticule, carried by her and no one else. Lord Eustace Kirkham stood near the grand staircase beneath a portrait of Simon's grandfather. Lady Cynthia Kirkham remained beside him, composed enough to suggest she expected victory. Eustace wore another pair of cufflinks. Caroline noticed them only once. She had no need to compare replacements with the one in her possession. After a short musical performance, conversations loosened, chairs shifted, and the guests gathered naturally toward the entrance hall and broad staircase. Cynthia did not wait for uncertainty to settle. "Your Grace," she said to Simon, "I believe we are all aware why this gathering was necessary." Her gaze moved to Caroline. "Miss Sutton has allowed accusations against my brother to damage his name. After what Miss Fenner revealed last week, I think it only proper that the injury be corrected before the same people who heard it." Eustace stood with one hand resting near his waistcoat, his expression bored rather than anxious. An apology would end the matter. Caroline felt the room turn toward her. A week earlier, such attention had made her feel as though the floor itself could vanish beneath her feet. Tonight she remained still. Simon had promised not to stand in front of her truth. He did something harder. He stepped forward and spoke before Caroline did, but not in her defense. "Before Miss Sutton is asked for an apology, I owe one." Cynthia blinked. Eustace's posture changed. Simon's voice carried without effort. "On the 4th of May at Melbury Court, Lady Cynthia gave me her account of an incident involving her brother, Miss Sutton, and one of my household servants. I accepted that account before asking the two women involved what had actually happened. No one interrupted. I then ordered Miss Sutton to apologize or leave my house. Several guests lowered their eyes. Simon continued. That was my failure. I treated the appearance of order as more important than hearing the person I was commanding. I corrected the order once I learned the facts, but the correction does not erase what I did first. Miss Sutton owed no apology then. I owe her one now before the same sort of audience before whom she was judged." He looked at Caroline. "I am sorry." Caroline met his gaze. Thank you, Your Grace. Nothing more was required. Simon stepped aside. The movement mattered more than any flourish could have. He gave the room back to her. Cynthia recovered first. Very admirable. But His Grace's mistake does not prove my brother guilty of every story Miss Sutton has encouraged. Caroline turned to her. I will speak only to what I personally saw. She opened her reticule and removed the folded paper. When she unwrapped it, the black enamel cufflink lay in her palm, the small Kirkham griffin visible beneath the candlelight. Eustace's face tightened. On the morning of the 4th, Caroline said, I entered the side service passage at Melbury Court after hearing Molly Finch protest. Lord Eustace was blocking her way. She refused to meet him alone later that night. When she tried to pass, he caught her wrist. She pulled away. This cufflink came from his left cuff and fell to the floor. I picked it up. Cynthia gave a small, incredulous laugh. A loose fastening and an overheard conversation. Caroline did not argue with her. She turned toward the nearby doorway. Molly. The maid appeared with Mrs. Keene several steps behind her. Molly's wrist had long since healed. No dramatic mark remained to display. Caroline was glad of it. Would you like to speak? Caroline asked. Molly looked at Simon, then at the Dowager, then finally at Caroline. Yes, miss. Caroline moved back. Molly faced the room. Her voice trembled on the first sentence, then steadied. Lord Eustace stopped me in the passage. He asked me to meet him after the house had gone quiet. I said no. He told me I should be careful not to make a gentleman look foolish if I wanted a good reference. When I tried to go past him, he took hold of my wrist. I pulled away. Eustace exhaled sharply. A servant's imagination can turn ordinary flirtation into anything once someone tells her she has been wronged. Molly's face colored, but she did not retreat. Caroline said nothing for her. Rachel did. No one had to tell me. Every head turned. Rachel stepped away from the wall. She looked pale but no longer rehearsed. At Lady Wexham's musicale, I said Miss Sutton offered me money to accuse Lord Eustace. Cynthia's eyes narrowed. Rachel. Rachel did not look at her. That was false. Miss Sutton never offered me money. No one from Melbury offered me money. A murmur moved through the room. Rachel continued before it could grow. Lady Cynthia learned my younger sister was trying to obtain a respectable place. I was told that if I did not speak against Miss Sutton, questions might be raised about my family and my sister's character. Cynthia went white. That is a grotesque distortion. Rachel finally looked at her. It's exactly what happened. Eustace laughed. And now, conveniently, you have changed your account. Yes, Rachel said. Because the first account was a lie. The simplicity of it silenced him. Mrs. Keene stepped forward only when the Dowager nodded. She held no enormous ledger, no theatrical bundle of secret papers. Only the dated memorandum she had made from the household records before leaving Kent. I can confirm 3 departures following Kirkham visits, she said. Rachel Fenner 6 months ago. And Mercer before her. Eliza Broom earlier still. In each case, Lady Cynthia complained of impertinence or improper assumptions. In at least 2 cases, a more favorable reference was discussed only after an apology was requested. Cynthia turned on her. You are reconstructing servants' gossip as evidence. No, my lady. I am giving dates and employment facts I personally handled. Simon then called Eustace's valet from the adjoining room. The man looked as though he would rather have faced a firing squad than a room of aristocrats, but his answers were brief. Did you dress Lord Eustace on the morning of the 4th of May? Simon asked. Yes, Your Grace. Did you fasten his cuffs? Yes. How many matching cufflinks? 2. When Lord Eustace returned to pack after leaving Melbury Court? The left one was missing, Your Grace. Simon nodded. Thank you. Nothing more. The valet withdrew immediately. Eustace's composure finally broke. This is ridiculous. A housemaid, a dismissed servant, a housekeeper, and a fastening. They have conspired because Miss Sutton offered them importance. Caroline looked at Molly. At Rachel. At Mrs. Keene. None of them appeared triumphant. None had gained money, rank, security, or admiration from standing there. Caroline faced Eustace. What, precisely, have any of them gained? He opened his mouth. No answer came. The silence spread slowly through the hall. Cynthia stepped forward, desperation sharpening her elegance. I protected my brother from women who misunderstood him. That is all. Servants are vulnerable to foolish ideas. Someone had to restore proportion. Rachel's voice came quietly from behind Caroline. You made us apologize because you understood it perfectly. Cynthia turned toward her. No one moved to rescue her from the sentence. No one applauded. The absence of noise was harsher. Simon waited until the truth had settled before speaking. Lord Eustace and Lady Cynthia will no longer be received at Melbury Court or Melbury House. Nor will they have access to any household under my direct authority. The Dowager Duchess added, any reference affected by complaints connected to these incidents will be reconsidered on its actual merits. Simon looked to Molly. If you wish to pursue a legal complaint, my mother will ensure you have access to independent advice. Whether you do so is your decision. Molly nodded. Thank you, Your Grace. Cynthia left first. Eustace followed her without looking at Caroline. The remaining guests dispersed slowly, with none of the eager chatter that usually followed scandal. When the final carriage had gone and the entrance hall stood quiet again, Caroline rewrapped the cufflink and returned it to her own reticule. Simon approached only after she had finished. Caroline. She looked at him. When this is no longer about protection, he said, may I court you? There was no audience left to impress. No injustice left for him to correct in exchange. Caroline let the silence last long enough to make the choice wholly hers. Then she smiled. Yes. Simon's breath eased. Caroline added, slowly. His answering smile was quiet and almost boyish. Slowly. In the weeks after the gathering at Melbury House, justice arrived without music, candlelight, or witnesses arranged beneath a grand staircase. It came in smaller forms. Molly Finch asked to speak with the Dowager Duchess and said, with visible effort but without hesitation, that she wished to make a formal complaint concerning Lord Eustace Kirkham. No one praised her for bravery. No one told her what she ought to feel. The Dowager simply informed her that legal expenses would be met without condition and that Molly could choose the solicitor who advised her. Simon did not attend the first consultation. Caroline did not answer questions on Molly's behalf. Molly gave her own account, and when the black-enamel cufflink was later required as supporting evidence, Caroline transferred it temporarily to the solicitor with its history plainly recorded. The original remained one object with one chain of custody, no more and no less. The matter moved slowly, as such matters did. By autumn, Eustace faced a financial penalty and was required to enter recognizances with sureties for his good behavior. The consequence was not theatrical, but it was real. More damaging to him was the response of his own family. The Marquis of Kirkham removed his younger son from responsibilities involving household money and estate business, and invitations that once arrived without thought began to cease. Lady Cynthia's punishment belonged to a different world. She had committed no conveniently simple crime for society to prosecute, but she was compelled to retract publicly the accusation that Caroline had bribed Rachel Fenner. Mrs. Keene reviewed the relevant servant references, and those damaged by Cynthia's complaints were corrected where the facts justified correction. Several prominent hostesses who had once welcomed Cynthia's polish with enthusiasm stopped receiving her. The social future she had tried to preserve by making poorer women apologize for other people's misconduct narrowed with every closed drawing-room door. Rachel suffered no punishment for the lie she had told under coercion. Her younger sister obtained and kept a respectable domestic position because the employer learned the truth of the family's circumstances, not because Simon had purchased the place. Molly remained at Melbury Court by her own choice. Caroline, too, remained employed by the Dowager Duchess. That mattered to her more than society understood. She did not become dependent upon marriage for rescue from disgrace, because Simon had made certain his courtship never became the price of her security. He called properly. He wrote letters that were sometimes serious and sometimes unexpectedly funny. He joined the Dowager and Caroline for drives when propriety allowed. He argued with Caroline over an estate question in June, listened when she disagreed, and changed his mind only after asking why she believed he was wrong. In July, he forgot himself and attempted to decide the route of an outing without consulting anyone else. Caroline raised one eyebrow. Simon stopped in the middle of the instruction, laughed at himself, and asked what the ladies preferred. It was such an ordinary correction that Caroline loved him for it more deeply than she had loved any grand gesture. Their courtship lasted through summer and into early autumn. Affection became less fragile because it was no longer tested only in crisis. Simon learned that Caroline disliked overripe pears, preferred walking to being driven when the weather allowed, and sometimes became quiet not because she was wounded but because she was thinking. Caroline learned that Simon read political reports in bed, hated badly tuned pianos, and became gentler rather than colder when he was tired. They quarreled twice. Neither quarrel ended with Caroline fearing dismissal or Simon fearing abandonment. That, more than romance, taught them what safety could look like. By late September, the walled garden at Melbury Court had begun to turn toward autumn. The borders were thinning, and the air carried the clean scent of leaves beginning to dry. Caroline walked beside Simon beneath an old brick wall warmed by afternoon sun. She still carried the grey Margate pebble in her pocket. She had not shown it to him again since London. Simon stopped near a bench but did not sit. "There is something I have wanted to say without attaching a question to it." Caroline looked at him. "That sounds ominous." "It is only terrifying." She smiled. Simon did not. His expression held too much feeling for humor. "I love you, Caroline. Not because you taught me how to be good. I love you because when truth cost you comfort, you still wouldn't make yourself smaller." Her breath caught. She had heard admiration before. She had received gratitude. She had even received his love once in the conservatory, when neither of them knew what would happen the next day. This was different. There was no scandal left to resolve. No witness waiting to be protected. He loved her in daylight, in ordinary life, after months of discovering that dignity could be inconvenient. Caroline stepped closer. "I love you, Simon. Not because you're powerful enough to silence a room. Because you learned when the room needed you to be silent." His face changed with a tenderness so open that she felt it almost physically. He reached for her hand, then stopped just before touching it. The habit made her smile. Caroline closed the space herself and placed her hand in his. "You may hold it," she said. "I was hoping you might allow that." He did. For several moments they simply stood together. Then Simon drew a breath. "Caroline Sutton, will you marry me?" She looked at the man who had once believed authority meant ending uncertainty quickly, and who had learned instead to ask questions he could not command answers to. "Yes," she said. "I will." Their banns were properly read. In October, they married at the parish church near Melbury Court with the Dowager Duchess smiling through tears she denied having shed and Mrs. Keene standing with the solemn satisfaction of someone who had watched a household survive the truth. Caroline became the Duchess of Melbury only after she had already chosen Simon as a man. That distinction remained precious to her. They did not end their story at the church door. Some days later, after the first rush of congratulations and obligations had eased, Simon took Caroline to Margate. The sea was grey beneath a pale sky, and the wind pulled at Caroline's bonnet ribbons as they walked along the shore. She stopped where the water had left a line of shells and stones along the sand. For a moment she listened to the tide. Then she reached into her pocket and drew out the smooth grey pebble crossed by its single white vein. Simon looked at it but did not reach. "Your mother's," he said. "Yes." Caroline turned it between her fingers. "For years I carried it because it belonged to a time when one person knew me before the world began telling me which rooms I was permitted to occupy." Simon's expression softened. "Do you want me to hold it?" Caroline looked at him. The question was simple. Perhaps that was why it moved her so deeply. She placed the pebble in his palm. Simon closed his fingers around it for only a moment, then opened his hand and returned it. Caroline put the stone back into her own pocket. It remained hers. Her memory. Her anchor. Her history. Then she reached for Simon with the hand she had emptied. He took it gently. Together they walked along the English shore, the grey pebble safe in Caroline's pocket and her free hand resting in Simon's, not because she needed someone to keep her standing, but because at last she had found a man who understood the difference between holding her and holding her back.